I want to say this right up front before we get to our first guest, John Davison from The Federalist, that at no point in this discussion are either one of us going to root for a Russian victory in Ukraine. But that's exactly how it's portrayed. If you have any questions about corruption in Ukraine and the billions and billions of dollars that we are sending to Ukraine with no questions asked. So with that said, joining me on the program right now is senior editor at The Federalist, John Davison. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so what do you think of that sort of opening thought, that if you have any questions about what the Ukrainians are doing with the money we're sending them, if you have any questions about what Zelensky may be doing, like padding a Swiss bank account, well, then obviously you're rooting for Vladimir Putin to win.
It's been like that since this whole thing started back in February. If you question the provision of aid to Ukraine, if you questioned Zelensky's government at all, you were just a Russian stooge. You were, a secret Putin fan. You were a fascist. No criticism of Ukraine or Zelensky, or especially Biden's policies toward Ukraine, has been allowed through this whole process. And now that we've sunk something like $54 billion into the country with no end in sight, real questions arising about corruption in Zelensky's government, the war not going well, not the way we were told it would go. We're seeing kind of doubling down, like, don't ask any questions. Ukraine needs us now more than ever. Just unlimited weapons, unlimited funds in a country that is clearly corrupt.
Yeah, that's more than we gave the auto industry
right
during the Obama years to allegedly prop up and save our automobile industry. But one of the things here, and it's really, I think it's more protecting Biden at this point, that if you say, if Biden says, well, gas prices are going up because of Putin, or food prices are going up because of Putin, you say, well, you sure about that? That was kind of happening before. Oh, you're with Putin. If you don't blame Putin for everything, you might as well be a Putin supporter, if there is such a thing. But that's the way they're treating you, right? If you have any questions about what Biden says are the effects of the Ukraine war, if you say, well, wait a second, sir, inflation and gas prices were going up before Russia went into Ukraine. Oh, wait, what do you stand with Putin? You're with Putin? No, two things can be true at the same time.
Well, scapegoating, foreign conflicts or foreign governments is an age-old tactic of failing and incompetent administrations, and that's what we're seeing with the Biden administration. To the extent they even acknowledge that gas prices are up and the food prices are up and the economy is suffering, to the extent that they will even acknowledge that as a problem, it's always in the next breath, well, that's because it's Putin's gas hike, it's Putin's price hike, it's Putin's inflation. And you almost get the sense that without Putin as a scapegoat, they would kind of be up a rhetorical creek here, no excuses left except their own mismanagement of the economy, and that maybe they actually need this conflict to keep going. And so maybe it's in their interest politically to prolong it by just funneling unlimited amounts of weapons and funding into Ukraine.
Do we have a sneaking suspicion that some of these Ukrainian oligarchs are taking some of this money and running? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any parameters on what they can do with it, right? It's nice that NATO nations are ponying up drones or other military, other military hardware, but the ginormous pile of cash. I mean, are we going to be is the United States going to be expected to rebuild Ukraine after this is all over? Because it would take a lot of courage for the world to say, no, Russia, you've got to foot the bill now.
Well, that's exactly what the world should say. I mean, Putin broke it. He owns it. But look, we have no way of knowing whether Ukrainian oligarchs are padding their pockets with the tens of billions of U.S. and foreign aid that are going into the country, because there's zero oversight. There's zero oversight of the weapons over there. And I should say, even people who are really pro-U.S. intervention, who are kind of have a neoconservative take on the war, people in Washington, some Congress people as well, who want U.S. aid and want U.S. weapons on the ground, they actually want more U.S. involvement, special forces in Ukraine to be overseeing the use of some of these weapons, because these are the people who are raising red flags about a lack of oversight. They say, well, there's no oversight in these weapons that we're giving to Ukraine. We need to send our people in to supervise the use of these weapons. So it's not just, you don't just have to be anti, U.S. involvement in the war. Even for people who do have a neoconservative take on the war, they still recognize that the lack of oversight is an appalling error on the Biden administration's part.
I think Trump made it okay for conservatives to say, you know what, this intervention and stuff doesn't work. Yeah. We can't nation build. We can't always be expected to be the world police and always lead the efforts and always be the top funder. And again, I think it's very clear we're not rooting for Ukraine to win. I think Trump was right to stand up and say, if the Germans get hooked on Russian oil, it's going to be a problem. And you know what? NATO should pay more for its own defense. Now, it's nice that some of these NATO nations are granting their military hardware and technology to Ukraine, but we're always out front.
Yeah, and we always have been, and we probably always will be. NATO countries, the European countries have shown over the long life of NATO sort of a lack of willingness to really invest in their militaries. And they would rather invest in social welfare programs. And frankly, Trump was right about the fact that the U.S. doing all the heavy lifting for NATO has enabled these countries to build up a sort of a welfare security state instead of building up a strong national defenses, each country for themselves, which is what, NATO is supposed to do. It was supposed to incentivize these countries to do that. That hasn't happened. It hasn't worked out. And so, in addition to there being real questions about U.S. escalating involvement in the Ukraine war, there's also unanswered questions about sort of the future of NATO and how well it really works. And a lot of people say, oh, Russia's invasion of Ukraine proves that NATO is a great idea. I think it's too soon to say that.
Well, I think the Russians and the Chinese see a United States that was at war for 20 years. And, if I could only imagine the advisors to Putin seeing a war-weary United States, gas prices going up, inflation going up, a public mood that's souring, a border that's not secure, they probably knew the American public was not in any hurry to get into another war, which made it a prime opportunity. And they had already bought off some of our allies with their oil. So, Joe Biden kind of created a perfect storm. The botched pullout from Afghanistan, the canceling of the Keystone XL pipeline, the total reversal of Trump's energy policies, and lifting the sanctions on Nord Stream 2.
Yeah, a whole host of contradictory policy and self-defeating policies sort of created a perfect storm for someone like Putin to say, hey, make hay while the sun shines. There's never going to be a better opportunity to accomplish our long-term goals in Ukraine than right now with this feckless, weak president who can't effectively withdraw troops from Afghanistan, who can't secure his borders, everything you just mentioned. He knew the West would be weak as a result of Biden's policies, and he chose his moment to strike.